Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Today's show is sponsored by Heirloom Roses. Visit them online at heirloomroses.com. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I am really enjoying this spring because as we're recording this, the iris are blooming. Mm-hmm. The large flower types are just kind of starting, and so we're going to enjoy some weeks of iris and peonies. Mm-hmm. You know, in some sheltered locations, they're already blooming. Ours are just budding. And I'm enjoying the cool weather that we've been having.
It's been great.
I remember last year it got hot in June.
Oh, by this time,
And some of the iris lasted maybe 10 minutes or so before they just crumbled away, shriveled away. And so I'm enjoying, the flowers are enjoying this cool weather. And the vegetable garden, not so much. The tomatoes, could use the heat. But, you know, we've got good moisture.
Yep.
And things are, and I'm enjoying walking around. And I'm excited about today's topic because our rose bushes have buds on.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to be long until they're going to be in full bloom. And, of course, June is National Rose Month. And so what an appropriate time to talk about today's topic, roses.
I don't know if people who, I'm sure people who grow roses, there's probably not a bad time to talk about roses because they, they really are. They do have this kind of iconic and symbolism. There's this great cultural weight put on roses there. You know, look, they're even at Christmas time. Rose at Christmas, all these other things. Roses are they're a year-round great gift.
Well, if you search the world's most best loved flower, and rose always comes up.
Yeah, can you think of any
country,
other kind of
if you
plant?
Google what's the favorite flower of a certain country, such as the United States, it's always roses. And there's kind of this mystique about roses. How would you describe it? Now, why is the rose so favored like that? I'm curious. You know, it's such a beautiful, just perfect, a picture-perfect rose. Oftentimes they've got fragrance.
Well, I know that in some cases it goes back to it's mentioned in Greek mythology and certain types of mythology that the rose is red because a goddess cut herself on one and she bled onto its petals and turned it red. And then so the rose is around and it's featured in mythology throughout the years.
Yeah, so this thing we have with roses goes back a long, long time.
Well, it's even in religion, isn't it? I didn't realize until today. The rosary is based on the rose.
Sure, yeah. Exactly.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, so it's just fascinating. And so what more fun since we have this engagement with roses.
Yeah.
And by the way, speaking of engagement, I'm not sure exactly how the romance and the red roses romance and how all that got blended together, but it did.
It did.
And so, Valentine's Day, roses.
Yep.
But what I really enjoy is having roses in our own landscape, in our own yard. And we can. Roses are within reach. Sometimes roses, might have the reputation as being a little difficult to grow.
Some may say prickly. Because I think that's a big part of it, and that comes with the whole mythology was that it's this beautiful flower, but the stems, because of their thorns, they may be considered hard to work with. So the rose has this kind of imagery while it can be in a bouquet, it can be a very kind of a solitary thing. It can hold its own. It can be maybe even standoffish. It's an interesting,
Sure, and along with beauty and many things comes a few things that are difficult.
Yeah.
So I suppose, so it's funny. It's kind of a life's analogy, I suppose, about different things. And so anyway, I'm excited to talk about, because I've enjoyed growing roses since I was a little boy. I gave my mom a couple of rose bushes. They were a tender type. We planted them. They did well. They had to be protected for the winter. They survived. They didn't survive many, many years. But what I enjoy now is in our own yard, we've got roses that come each year. They return, they bloom. We have to do a little work that we'll talk about, but I am enjoying it. And we are in good times for rose growing because the breeders over the last few decades have really developed even better winter hardy types with improved form and improved care. And they've even gotten better, easier to grow than they were in the past.
Yeah, in general, would you say, I mean, I think because like we were just saying that the roses may have this reputation as being, maybe difficult or maybe kind of imposing because of the thorns, but are they generally easy to grow?
Yeah, I think they're easy to grow,
Okay.
but no,
I shouldn't say easy, but not difficult.
They're rewarding.
Yeah.
Any amount of work that you give is more than rewarded back to you. Now, it's interesting. You mentioned kind of that mystique, maybe kind of a little reputation for being a little hard to grow. Now, what I chuckle a little bit because there are rose societies.
Yes.
And that kind of sounds like you need to be kind of an upper echelon of gardening, and I'm not it. I always say if I can grow something, anybody can. And, so there's the American Rose Society, and those are wonderful groups. Mm-hmm. And so for people that really get into roses, roses are classified. There are these that have been around for centuries, these rose classifications that rose aficionados would know. You hear terms like hybrid tea, grandiflora, floribunda, hybrid musk roses, polyanth roses, and all of these are specific categories, and shrub rose is one. And so, you could really get into this. But the way that I like to classify roses is, are they winter hardy or are they not winter hardy? Will they die over winter without protection or will they survive? And so for kind of a practical standpoint, I like to classify roses kind of into those two types. And many of those rose classifications that I talked about, such as hybrid tea. Hybrid tea, by the way, is that picture-perfect florist type rose.
Okay.
When you imagine a rose in your head or something you'd get at Valentine's Day, those are the hybrid teas. That's kind of the epitome of the perfection of a rose, hybrid tea. But unfortunately, in our area, they need winter protection. And so those I'd kind of categorize into the not winter hardy type. Still worth growing. Mm-hmm. Fun to cover them, see what you can get to grow. I've got one hybrid tea rose called Peace Rose, okay. And it rewards me so beautiful. I have to cover it over winter, or I know it probably would not make it. And I also have it in an area that will get snow cover. But that Peace Rose, which is a blend of yellows and pinks, and it's fragrant and picture perfect. And so even though I need to cover it for the winter, it just rewards me so beautifully that it's worth the extra effort that I put in. So anyway, when we are kind of talking about roses, that's what most of us are probably looking for is, when I go out and look for a rose and think about buying it, is this a winter hardy type that I won't have to give extra measures for it to survive? Or is this a tender type that I'm going to have to cover? So that's kind of the classification. I could mention there's kind of an in-between category called a crown hardy rose. Now, okay. The crown of rose, and that's kind of an important term to know, the crown of a rose or any perennial type, the crown is the point that's between the branches on roses. They're called canes, rose canes, and the root system. So it's kind of that central heart of it right between the branches and the roots. That's called the crown. And crown hardy roses might totally die back. Everything, the branches and everything might die back, but you'll get a growth that comes from that crown, that area between stems and roots. But of course, if a rose dies back that severely, then each spring it's going to have to kind of rebound from that and maybe won't get quite as high. But some of especially the national chain stores, do sell some types of roses that we'd call crown hardy. I should mention too, when you see on a tag, hardy rose. Hardy is a very, depending on where you live, hardy right. For Georgia.
It's relative.
Yeah, exactly. That was the word I was searching for, relative. Hardy in Georgia isn't necessarily hardy for Fargo, North Dakota, or anywhere in Minnesota, South Dakota, Montana. And so some of these roses that you see at the national chains that say hardy, they might be crown hardy, meaning they're going to die back quite severely, they might come back. But when I call the winter hardy types, we're going to get into some of the names, but many of those were developed in Canada for a truly winter hardy rose that's going to come back from the canes. And so they reward us without a whole lot of extra measures.
Let's take a quick little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about roses.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
Okay, so if you're going to get a rose, what do we need to know? Like, where does a rose want to be planted? What conditions, like soil types? What is it like? What is it like for sun?
Okay, lots of sunshine.
Okay.
If a rose were planted in too much shade, it's just not going to bloom well.
Okay.
So lots of sunshine. Now, if you had your choice of a location, a side on the maybe east side of the house where it's going to get full morning and into the early afternoon sunshine, but then it gets the cooler, in the afternoon it'll be cooler. It'll have some shade in the heat of the afternoon, and that helps the roses last longer. So morning sun until early afternoon is probably the ideal, and then a little bit afternoon shade for the rest. And so now the soil
type,
for roses. Yeah. So, roses don't really like heavy clay soil, and they don't like real light sandy soil either. What they really like is a soil high in organic matter, such as peat moss. Roses love peat moss. And since a rose's root system doesn't really spread out too far, if you ever dug up an old rose, they don't have such a massive root system. It tends to stay in a fairly localized spot. And that's good because we can amend that soil right around the rose bush, and those roots will be able to enjoy that. So lots of compost, peat moss, and et cetera. And so we've got the location, plenty of sun. We're going to amend the soil, so it's good organic. Peat moss is wonderful. And so next, when you go to the garden center, what do you look for in a rose? Well, you do have a couple of choices. There are good online sources to order roses from.
Okay.
And the online sources, the roses might come bare root, or some of them sell potted roses that they ship to you by mail. And those mail order nurseries are wonderful. And of course, one of our sponsors.
Yep.
Heirloom Roses. Yeah, a wonderful company. And so whether you order online or check the locally owned garden centers, most of the locally owned garden centers are going to be potted roses, and those can be planted all summer long. Now, the earlier in the summer or spring that you plant, it'll have a little longer time throughout the growing season to get established. So, the earlier in summer, June is a great month here to plant roses. And when you're looking for roses, there's two terms to be familiar with, okay? One is grafted.
Okay.
Grafted roses. Now, for years and years, the way that the big commercial nurseries started new roses was by grafting. They took a vigorous root system, and they grafted the good flowering part onto that root system. And it resulted in a knob. You could usually see that graft knob right between branches and root. And, that works. But winter hardiness is one of the uppermost things in our mind on roses. Okay.
Right.
And what if we have a severe winter and the branches die back? If they die back to that graft knob, your good flowering part is lost. The root system might grow, but the root systems weren't selected to have nice flowers. They were just selected for roots, and you don't get flowers. I've tried that. I've had grafted roses where the top part froze back, things started growing from the base, and they don't flower. So anyway, okay, that was and you can still buy grafted roses. Some places sell them grafted roses. The other way of propagating roses is called own root, OWN root, R-O-O-T, own root. Now, what that is the rose developers and propagators found ways to grow roses from cuttings. Okay, and so you take a cutting, you get it to root, and that entire rose plant then, from the tip all the way to the roots, is that same good flowering variety.
Okay.
So even if we have a severe winter and part of the top dies back, or a lot of the top dies back, anything that grows back from the roots or the base is that good flowering variety. So when you have the choice between a grafted rose and an own root rose, the own root are preferred.
Okay.
And the sponsor, Heirloom Roses, when you look at their website, one of their key features is that they say they sell own root roses. And so when I'm looking for roses, I always look for own root roses versus the grafted roses, because the own root roses will just have a naturally better reliability for winter. So, it seems like we're kind of getting into technicalities, but that's really important on those for winter survivability.
We're talking about the soil mix around it. You want to put in some organic material. It doesn't like a heavy clay soil. What about, so it probably wouldn't necessarily like a wet area. You want to keep it not wet area and not a dry area, because like you said, you don't want that late afternoon sun just baking it. So
yep, exactly.
How wet do you want to keep the rose plant?
And roses love moisture. They don't want standing water. They don't want it to be too soggy. That's where the organic matter really helps. Peat moss, compost, that kind of helps it to drain better. It gives some water holding ability, but then also excess water would drain off. And that comes to mind too, the importance of planting depth on roses. So you've bought the rose, get it home, you've amended the soil, you're going to amend the soil that you backfill around the rose, lots of peat moss. Could really be half peat moss or compost and half soil. You could do that much of peat moss. Roses love it. Well, anyway, the planting depth is really, really important for northern areas like Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. And so regardless of what the tag says, because sometimes those tags are written for other areas of the country, regardless of what the tag says for planting depth, in our area, plant the rose so that crown that I mentioned, the area between the branches and the roots, that crown area needs to be 4 or 5 inches below soil surface. So that means when you're planting or digging your hole, kind of gauge the depth, set the rose bush down in, see where that crown is going to end up. And so that means when you backfill around the rose bush, you stuck the rose down the hole, you're backfilling, and that means you're going to be putting dirt up onto those branches.
Okay.
And that's okay. You're getting that crown of the rose down below soil surface, so in the winter, it'll have that big mass of soil protecting it and moderating
that warmth, that radiant
exactly.
warm,
A shallower planted rose is more apt to totally freeze out. So we're protecting that crown, that heart of the rose by getting it down a little bit deeper. And you mentioned the watering. Roses love water, so this is a good reason also to mulch around roses, because a good mulch, shredded wood product is wonderful. That helps keep the soil more cool so it doesn't get real hot, and it also will conserve moisture. Now, roses can be planted in rock mulch. Some commercial areas do have roses growing in their rock mulch, but that's kind of not the preferred. The rocks get so hot.
Yeah.
And rose roots don't like that. And also the weight of the rocks can really be just heavy and compacting on soil. So a good organic type shredded bark really does well. More rose friendly.
Okay. We talked a little bit about that the rose likes to drink a lot. Are they heavy feeders too?
They are. And anyways, I always love that term, old gardening terms. We got to write a book one day, John.
Heavy feeders?
Yes, heavy feeders. I love that term. Meaning they love nutrition, they love the fertilizer, and they really respond with the fertilizer you give. Now, when deciding what fertilizer to give roses, there are packaged fertilizers for roses, say rose food. And those are all great. They've been tweaked a little bit, especially for roses. But all-purpose fertilizers are good too. A 10-10-10 all-purpose fertilizer. And usually on the package, it'll say, around roses or other shrubs, put this amount. Mm-hmm. The water-soluble types, they're great for roses too. And so fertilizing as soon as growth starts, either end of April, early May. So fertilize in May, fertilize now in June, and you can fertilize till the end of June.
Okay.
And then cut off about July 4th. The reason for not fertilizing roses after July 4th is this. Roses for the last half of the summer season need to kind of start toughening up.
Okay.
And if we fertilize late April, May, June, end of June, there's enough nutrition there in the soil to carry it through. But if we fertilize too late into the growing season, it could stimulate a flush of tender growth that wouldn't have time to toughen in before winter sets in. So July 4th, Independence Day for gardeners, we don't need to fertilize roses after about July 4th. And so end of June is your first or for your last fertilizing for roses. But boy, really important. You can, if you had two identical roses side by side and fertilize one, don't fertilize the other, it makes a huge difference in the amount of blossoms, the amount of growth, the vigor, the ability to bounce back with another flush of blooms. So it really makes a big difference. And when I say if you got one side by side, I've done that. I enjoy kind of trying things and seeing, and it does. It makes a huge difference. And so roses, it's just kind of not one of those nice little extra things you do, but it is a really important thing that is well worth the extra step.
Well, and for something like you said, the fertilizer, you can use a very basic 10-10-10, or go to a store and look for something that says rose fertilizer. It really won't be too much work for you to do. So it's kind of a good thing to know.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of like the water soluble fertilizers because you pour it on and it goes right down into the root system. The granular types are good too, but they have to dissolve into solution. So you kind of have to water those afterwards or do it before it rain.
But with the water-soluble ones, you really want to make sure you pour it right onto the soil, not above. You don't want to water the leaves.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, because it's meant to go into the root system. I should mention, though, you bring up an interesting point. If you look at some of the water-soluble types, it indicates that they can be applied to the foliage.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's fascinating. Leaves do have the ability to take up some nutrients through them. And so it's kind of a science called foliar feeding. And so you can actually feed through the leaves as well as roots. But you bring up the good point you bring up, though, is you can't do that in the heat of the day.
Right.
In the heat of the day, the sunshine, fertilizer on the leaves, it'll burn. So the preferred is probably early morning.
Okay.
And so actually, when you read the instructions on the water-soluble types, it does indicate that you can apply it to the foliage. But key, as you caution, is the time of day has to be right, not the hot day of the sun.
All right, let's take another quick break. When we come back, let's talk about pruning roses and how to keep a rose through winter.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back. We're talking about roses. And I think one of the big, when people think of rose and rose care, I think the image that they have a lot of time is somebody who's out and they're cutting the roses or they're cutting the stems or something like that. So let's talk about pruning. How important is pruning for roses and when should we be doing it?
Yeah, pruning is really important because, and there's good reason for it. Now, a lot of and we're going to talk about some of the winter hardy rose types. But even if they are winter hardy and survive all the way to the tips of the rose, if you year after year just let it do that, the canes get old and woody and no longer bloom as well. Roses bloom better on fresh new growth. And the way to stimulate that fresh new growth is with pruning. So on our own roses, each year in April, before they start new growth, is we prune them back by at least half. sometimes more. Now, sometimes some winters, even the good winter hardy type will have some branch dieback. And you know what's dead? Because they're blackish brown,
Right.
and the live canes on a rose have green bark. And so you kind of can see, oh, I need to prune down. I need to get rid of all that dead winter injured stuff. So start there. And so sometimes maybe half of it is you need to prune down. But even if it's live to the tip, still prune down to a half or more and get rid of any weak, kind of little weakling branches. So you're down to kind of the good structural type canes. And love the old saying, prune until it hurts and then prune some more.
Okay.
It doesn't hurt the rose. It's kind of hurting us if we're a little squeamish. And don't worry, you cannot kill a rose by pruning too much. And usually we're maybe a little hesitant and don't take enough. And so what that pruning does by reducing the height of the rose by half or so at least, and thinning out some of the branches, is it encourages fresh new growth to come. And it's that fresh new growth that gives the best blooms and blossoms on that rose. So almost any rose should be pruned in April. Now, that also brings up the question on timing. Sometimes I'm asked, can we prune roses in the fall? And it's better not to. And the reason for that is in the fall of the year, rose bushes and other shrubs are slowing down. They're not doing their cell division and their growth and things. And so pruning cuts that we make won't seal themselves, with cell division and things. And so the cuts that we make in the fall of the year tend to remain open and unhealed. And there's moisture loss during the winter, and there's more chance of things going wrong. You get more branch dieback by pruning. It probably wouldn't kill a rose if you did prune it in the fall, but there's more chance of something going wrong. And there's no good reason to prune in the fall. Well, other than if you have to shovel the sidewalk and the rose is hanging over it, I suppose that would be a good case. But otherwise, in April, before they start new growth.
Well, speaking of damage to stems and talking about that, maybe especially in winter, one of the things that I would imagine is that, and I've heard, is that rose bushes can be really tasty for rabbits.
Oh, yes. And wouldn't you think that those thorns would totally be a defense mechanism
I think that'd be a real
anything
deterrent. They're a deterrent for me to wanting to touch
they
them.
are.
You can
because when I'm pruning roses, my wife Mary bought me canvas gloves, welder's gloves that go up almost to my elbows.
Oh, yeah.
And so big, heavy canvas welder's gloves. And I use those to prune because those thorns are nasty.
And you can really reach into a plant with that.
You
those
can.
long, with a long
exactly.
arm
So I
coverings.
use a combination of my long gloves
sleeve shirts
plus a long lopper type pruning shears that I can reach on in. Well, anyway, because they're so thorny. But that doesn't seem to deter the rabbits because some years the rabbits have totally pruned down our roses. Those years, I haven't had to do any pruning because the rabbits did it for us. And so sometimes rabbits will chew them down to the snow line. And I'm just always amazed. You think, gosh, wouldn't those thorns be kind of, tough on the tongue? But apparently not. They must consume those as well. And so anyway, rabbits can do a lot of damage on roses. And so if you suspect you're going to have a lot of rabbit injury, chicken wire around roses might be a good idea because they can, especially in the winter where we don't have snow, they can chew the canes all the way down to ground level, and then they have to really regrow.
Kind of along the lines of pruning a little bit, but deadheading is important for roses too, isn't it?
It is, especially for getting the roses to bounce back and bloom throughout the summer. Now, some roses, when you're checking labels, some roses are June bloomers. They have a big, tremendous flush of bloom in June, and then they don't the rest of the summer. Other roses are called repeat bloomers. And of course, most of us would like a rose that's going to bloom all summer. So do check the label. And most of those sold now are the repeat blooming type roses. So do check that. But where deadheading comes into this, and of course, deadheading means you cut off that old, withered, spent rose blossom. And that will encourage new blossoms. Now, Or maybe you're going to, before it even withers, maybe you're going to bring that rose in for a bouquet.
Right.
There's an interesting part. So if you ever do any reading on roses, you'll encounter a spot at which that rose is supposed to be cut, whether you're bringing it in fresh to enjoy for a bouquet or if you're deadheading the old blossom. And rose leaves are called compound. They're made up of leaflets. Okay. And right below the flower, if you go down right below the flower, that first leaf is made up of 3 leaflets. If you progress farther down, some have 5 leaflets and some have 7 leaflets.
Okay.
And if you cut down to right above a 3-leaflet leaf, which is the first one under the blossom, you don't get nice buds the way you do. So the customary way is to cut down right above a 5 or 7 leaflet leaf. It's funny. It sounds like you're kind of splitting hairs, but you'll encounter that very, very often in any rose books or rose literature. Is always, whether you're cutting a fresh bloom or deadheading, cut down to right above a 5 leaflet leaf or a 7 leaflet leaf. And it's the type of thing when you're looking at a rose bush, go down right below the blossom. Oh, yeah, I see what Kinsler meant. There's just 3 leaflets on that one, or there's 5 or 7. So anyway, deadheading, the importance of that is it removes that old spent flower and it encourages the next flush of blossoms to happen. And that will help the repeat blooming roses to keep getting a fresh batch of buds all summer long.
Do you want to deadhead all summer long, or do you want to quit at a certain point?
Yes. About August 1st, we can quit deadheading. There are a couple of reasons for that. And about August 1st, you no longer have to deadhead. Just let the roses be, because the fall buds are already going to be set. Okay. So you don't need to encourage anymore because the fall buds are already going to be set at that point. But also, leaving those blossoms on helps the rose shrub, to toughen in and harden off and get ready for wintertime. And the other benefit of that is some of the winter hardy shrub roses form beautiful hips. The hips are the fruit of the rose, and some of them can be very large and decorative. And I mean, you can even eat them. They're high in vitamin C. I don't think I've ever tasted a rose hip. That'd be a new experience.
I know some people use rose hips, I think, like make syrup or use them kind of in drinks, I think, or rose petals too. Yeah,
I'm kind of envisioning if you just kind of nibble on one, I'm envisioning something a little sour.
Yeah.
But we have a couple of rose bushes that routinely form rose hips. I got to nibble on one this year and just see what that's all about.
Yeah.
So anyway, at a certain point then in early August, then you stop the deadheading on those.
So right around the 4th of July, early July, quit fertilizing. Early August, quit deadheading. How do you keep a rose through the winter?
Okay, again, we get back to almost the first statements we made at the beginning of the program is 2 main classes of roses based on practicality. One are the tender roses that if you don't do anything, they're probably going to die over winter. The hybrid tea types, you'll see names like grandiflora. But anyway, those need winter protection in the form of mounding something up around. Maybe it's a rose cone, styrofoam rose cone, but pack it with leaves. Otherwise, there's too much cold air kind of right around the rose canes. Or a circle of chicken wire totally filled with leaves. They need a mulch, a protective mulch of some sort mounded up around the rose branches. Okay, so those are the tender type. The winter hardy roses need nothing like that. And they usually come through winter just fine. When I say usually, in a severe winter, maybe you'll get a little branch dieback, but you prune that off in the spring, they come out just fine. So that type of rose need no winter type protection at all. So that's the type I favor, even though I got our one-piece rose, the hybrid tea that we cover for winter. But the others, in the fall of the year, we just do nothing, and they survive well.
How long will a rose last? And that maybe that changes per variety, but you were talking about when you were a kid, you bought your mom a couple of rose plants, and you said that they lasted for a couple of years.
They were the tender type rose,
Okay.
and they survived as long as we covered them, but eventually then they didn't. But the fun thing is the winter hardy shrub roses, there are ones planted by pioneers in the area, upper Midwest, that are 100 years old on old farmsteads. There's a variety called Persian yellow, also known as Harrison yellow. Beautiful yellow rose. One downside, it only blooms in June. It's not a repeat bloomer. But these winter hardy roses that I'm going to talk about a little more in just a minute, they're capable of lasting, decades. 30, 40, 50 years. There's really no reason for them not to have a very long lifespan.
What are the characteristics about the North Dakota, the prairie rose?
Isn't that a fascinating? Yeah, our state flower, the North Dakota native prairie rose. Aren't those pretty? They have a single type blossom, without a lot of double frilly petals or anything on. But there's such a simplicity to those, aren't they? And of course, fully winter hardy. And some of that parentage was used in some of the winter hardy roses that were developed. It's interesting. I've talked a lot about these winter hardy roses. Okay, sometimes they're generically called winter hardy shrub roses. Now, the Canadians had a long history of breeding roses, and especially up in Manitoba. And of course, they're as cold or colder than we are.
Right.
And so they had a wonderful breeding program. And they developed in a series, at least 30, maybe it's 40 winter hardy roses. And so those are the ones that I've really enjoyed planting in our own yard. So they're a winter hardy shrub type rose. And when you go to the locally owned garden centers, and when I say locally owned, you're less apt to find these varieties at the national chains. Okay. So, but the locally owned garden centers are more likely to have these, and they're kind of generically called winter hardy Canadian rose variety. So if at the garden center you look at, they say, we have the Canadian hardy roses. Okay, this is kind of that group that they're talking about. So one series, and the Canadians developed these series of winter hardy roses. Mm-hmm. Okay, one series is called the Morden series, named after Morden, Manitoba. Okay, there's Morden Blush, which has done really well for us. It's a beautiful pink. Morden Belle is a little deeper pink. A Morden Sunrise, a beautiful yellow, amber, golden, orange blended rose, just absolutely beautiful. And there's a white Morden series. And so anyway, there's the Morden series. Then there's another series called the Canadian Artist series. Okay, and then you have the different roses named after some of their artists. Emily Carr, Bill Reed, Oscar Peterson, those are names, in the Canadian art scene would recognize. And there's a very popular, that's been extremely popular recently in that Canadian artist series. It's the rose called Campfire. And Campfire is a beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and John is just showing me his cell phone with Campfire pulled up. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah,
that rose.
Gorgeous.
It is a blend of yellow, cream,
Reds.
Deep pink, red, light pink, and just a beautiful. And it's fully winter hardy. People in our area have really found that to be a great rose, Campfire, and it's available at garden centers. Now, I had, kind of being a curious mind, I thought, okay, why would the variety Campfire be in the Canadian Artist series? What does that have to do with Canadian art, Campfire? And so I did a little looking, and there's a famous Canadian painting called that. And that's the painting right there. Yeah, it's
Tom Thompson, who an artist I've heard of before. Yeah, he is considered one of Canada's great artists.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's interesting. And so this Campfire rose was named kind of along the lines of that famous Canadian painting.
Yeah, it's
and
really
so,
interesting.
logically, then it fit into the Canadian Artist series. Okay, then another series is the Canadian Explorer series, after some of their historic explorers. You see names like Champlain, John Cabot, John Davis, the Harrison Yellow that I mentioned is kind of along those lines. And let's see, others in the series that you see, Hope for Humanity. That's been a popular red one.
Okay.
That's in that series. A Canadian Shield. We've got that one, a beautiful deep red rose. And so when you're shopping at the locally owned garden centers for the roses, and you'll see names like these Canadian winter hardy roses. And I've really been impressed because they do so well. So many different colors and shades. And most of these are repeat bloomers. So they'll be repeating from all the way from June all the way through frost. Our Morden Bell rose, we've got photos of it blooming in October.
Oh, wow.
The frost came in middle of October, and it was still blossoming. So these are wonderful roses. And, now we mentioned fertilizing, we mentioned pruning, and, sounds like maybe a lot of work, but it's not really. It's good work. And the fun thing about roses is when you invest a little bit of work in them, man, they reward you so many times over. The pruning rewards you, the fertilizing rewards you. And I like growing roses like this that you don't need to winter cover and uncover them the next spring. Just, prune, fertilize, mulch, water, and they're good. And they're going to last. Yes. And so you're going to enjoy these for decades and decades. So, good times for roses. I'm so happy that there are all these varieties.
And now you, of course, you've famously talked about on the show, you would like to grow one of everything that we can grow up here.
Yes, my bucket list.
Yeah. And are there any roses that you'd like to grow? You said you've already got one plant. We've got one plant of like the hybrid tea, the peace rose. Okay. Yep. And then I think we've got about 10 of these different Canadian roses. Okay.
And I would like one of each.
Yeah.
I would like one of each because they're kind of so unique. In fact, there's even one of these that's a climber, William Baffin.
Okay.
And another one, Henry Kelsey. They were developed in Canada, and they are hardy enough to put on a trellis. Now, they need support. You need to kind of tie them to the trellis, but it gives us a climbing rose, beautiful climbing roses as well. And I do have, I have William Baffin. Is that one. So, I probably am not going to have room for all of the roses. But, my bucket list, if I can include quite a few of these Canadian roses.
Well, that's great. This is really fun to talk about roses, especially this time of the year. If people have questions about their roses, or if they want to send you pictures, share pictures with you.
Oh, that'd be fun to have people share photos of their roses.
Yeah.
I know Campfire, I've seen lots on Facebook, but any of the other roses that you've had tremendous success with, I'd like to hear about them and see a photo. And especially they should be blooming in June, National Rose Month. And of course, June was selected for National Rose Month because this is the month really when the big flushes of roses first start coming on. And so, send me an email.
What's the best way to reach you?
Donald.Kinsler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu. And it'd be great to hear from you.
Well, this would be great. Thanks a lot for coming in, Don.
Yeah, thank you much. Have a good week, John, and have a good week, everyone.